Hello, and welcome back to the Book Love Podcast. I'm your host, Matt from Ohio, and if any of you have been watching or following along for a while, you will know that I am very stingy with 5-star reviews. But today, I am joined by the author of the 5-star novel, Clay Suzie. A Georgia native who has called Washington, D.C. home for multiple decades now as both an actor and a scholar, Jeffrey Dale Lofton now works as a senior advisor at the Library of Congress, surrounded by books like all of us want to be all day, every day. His debut novel, Clay Suzie, is the hopeful yet heart-wrenching coming-of-age story of a boy named Philbert who grows up in the 1960s, 1970s in rural Georgia as a physically deformed, gay, neurodivergent boy. And none of those things are, how we say, happy or acceptable. Clay Suzie was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, twice chosen as an Indie Next List pick, and in 2024, Jeffrey was named the Georgia Author of the Year. And I am so fortunate to be amidst this greatness. Jeffrey, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate it. It was so lovely to meet you and your wife and your sister-in-law in Crozet, Virginia, for Crozet Book Fest last October, I think it was. Great festival, a lot of fun, a lot of people interested in literature, and just a good vibe all around. And I'm so happy to be here to talk with you today.
That was quite a way to meet, and I guess if I'm going to say this: if anybody ever has the opportunity to attend an author event where you are, they should all take that opportunity and do it, because not only do you have interesting, honest, candid responses, but sir, you are one heck of a showman.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. It's the book. I wrote the book from my heart, and to read from it, to to read excerpts from it in front of people at events like Crozet Book Fest, hosted by Bluebird Booksellers. It just warms the heart to be around all those people, and it makes it easy to read from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been to several different book events, and the one that Flannery puts on in Crozet feels very different than any of the other book events I've ever been a part of. Much more intimate, much more close, honest. Well, let's dive in and talk about you to start. As both an actor and a library scientist of sorts, but also an author, it seems fairly clear to me that you're somebody that's very drawn to stories in general, creating them, curating them, bringing them to life, right? So what initially attracted you to stories, and then what attracts you to them now?
Well, I guess I have to look back to my childhood when I think about or wonder what makes me want to be a storyteller, what makes me love to listen to other people talk about their lives, read about other people's stories that they, form into books. I can remember when I was, being from the Deep South, everything happens on the porch, back porch, front porch, or even in the backyard in those sort of primary colored, woven, aluminum framed lawn chairs, sitting around with a big old glass of sweet tea, listening to my elders tell fanciful stories, some of them even true. It just sparked in me at a very young age this desire to share in a way that I think really happens in the South and among people where you feel comfortable to do that. And so I think that naturally took me into a place where I could escape being me, because I never felt comfortable in my own skin. I was different on the outside and on the inside, and I was trying to hide. And so I guess deflecting is one way to put it, but coming up with stories was one way to draw attention away from me, but also share me in another very significant way. So I think that it all started then, and then of course in college I, was in plays. Moved to DC to take an acting job, and I trod the boards of so many of DC's theaters, and sharing the words of another storyteller, playwrights, I think really helped me learn how to tell a story on my own. Those story arcs, the beginning, middle, of
Interesting.
an end, just the structure of the way plays um, are made. And of course, I've always been a really, voracious reader, loved books all growing up. Um, so all of that experience, I think, has helped bring me to where I am today as a writer. And of course, working in a library among people who love
Mhm.
books and being surrounded by, shelves and shelves of books of all kinds. It just, I think I think I soaked up something from the whole experience, being in that building with all those books all those years. I think if you let yourself, it's like osmosis, you just like draw all that into you. And then you have this desire to sort of put it back out there. That's why I think, I identify as a storyteller.
Is the stage acting experience sort of maybe is that a little bit of an influence of why Red Clay Susie is a 3 act setup?
Hmm. I hadn't thought about that. I think that this actually, possibly, it just made sense to structure it in that way. I mean, so many books that I've read um, have had that kind of structure to it. Just makes sense to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And I think I've translated that into a three-part story. And also because the Philbert story carries him from his fourth year through his 18th. And though it catches him at all ages throughout that, I really saw his development as, changing from that of a very innocent child to a rather still innocent um, tween to a more aware, more world weary, I think is a way to put it, rather than sophisticated teenager. And it just made sense to capture it in those three big chunks.
I think world weary is a really nice phrase because yeah, sophisticated isn't right, but also the concept of jaded is missing the mark. So I think
Yeah.
world weary is a very nice phrase to capture that. Um,
Yeah. Sort of
and
even careworn. He experiences, some rough times, and so world weary, though he's not very worldly, but but he's careworn. He spends so much of his time, as I did, hiding himself and trying to navigate this world where the everything about him is just custom made wrong for the world he's growing up in. And, that's debilitating, demoralizing, exhausting, and has such an impact on a young person to try to navigate, to try to fit in a world where you just don't see yourself reflected back at you in any way. I think of myself as a fringy, and I think of my fellow outsiders as fringies, because I have always felt that I've lived on the outside, the fringes of the world, looking in and never seeing what is deep down inside of my heart looking back at me. And so that's why I think of him as careworn.
that's a really good phrase. It was in the foreword of your book, right? Lindy Woodhead relates the story of meeting you and in one way or another, sort of being an impetus for you diving into authorship. But like clearly, the book is inspired by true events, and that must have been rolling around in your mind for much longer than just when you met um, Lindy. So I'm curious, like that was more of like a straw that broke the camel's back, I'm guessing. So what was the driving need inside of you for this story to come out and be told? And like because it must have been a need for you to type it out on your cell phone while commuting to and from work. Could you maybe describe that desire and that process a bit?
Yes, well, I actually started read Clay Suzie when I first left home to go to college, LaGrange College in LaGrange, Georgia. Um, and the best thing about LaGrange College and LaGrange, Georgia, at least I thought the best thing about them, was that they were away from where I grew up, which is Warm Springs, Georgia. And LaGrange is only about 35 miles down the road, but it was away. And that was the big point. The big, um, that was the reason I was able to see the world, be in it in a different way. Because I mean, I had spent years pushing down, suppressing all of these fears and frustrations and humiliation uh, that I felt being in that world. I mean, even among my own family members, um, I was the target of bullying and body shaming, um, and but being away from my family, from childhood, teenage friends, the people who really made up the fabric of my boyhood, it was as if a dam that had been holding back so much of that in my head for years just crumbled open and out flowed just this white hot memories, this flood of white hot memories that I just couldn't stop. And I was in crisis. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know how to sort of navigate that, being in a new world on my own. And I started to write. No one said, "Why don't you, write about it? It might make you feel better." It was a natural impulse, and so I started to journal, and it was like I've come to think of it. It was I was expunging my insides. I've come to think of it as
Mm.
an exorcism by exposition, and
That's a good phrase.
so. But the only thing is, I didn't continue writing. I put it away. Coursework got in the way. I um, I couldn't do it all. I was just about to fall apart. So I put those journals away, expecting to go back to them, you know, after I got my college sea legs under me, but I didn't go back to them for decades. And this is what happened. I read two books in succession. I reread To Kill a Mockingbird by the incandescent Harper Lee. And I'd read it as a teenager, but I wanted to read it again, um, with the perspective of being, an adult for so many years. And there was reading it again, there was a shock of recognition with that child protagonist Scout that I didn't understand, didn't have when I first read it when I was a child myself. And then the next book I read was Call Me by Your Name by Andre Aciman. And those two books,
Yes.
reading them one after the other, it was like two sticks of kindling um, rubbed together, and I caught on fire. And it just did something to me. I was 19 again. I was back in college. And this was under 10 years ago. So I had gotten, I thought I'm a grown person with a job and, a life, friendships, relationships. I said, I shouldn't be having this reaction to this literature, but it's the power of literature. You get it. This is the power of literature, how it
Yeah.
can affect. And I thought, I've got to finish this story. So I went back and I got those journals because I don't throw away anything. And I read them. I reread them with so much embarrassment and shame and tears because they were so raw with emotion. And it just, it took the breath out of me. to 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 see my younger
Yeah.
self reflected back at me like that. I didn't have a writing. I've always been a writer, a closet writer. I never told anybody I was writing. But, I said I got to finish this, and I didn't have a process. But I found that I would get ideas when I was on the train going to and from my job at the Library of Congress, and I would make a note on the app, the Notes app, and I'd write a little more and write a little more, and I every now every now and again I'd write from the time I got on the train to the time I got off, and I would have a little chapter. And one day I looked up and I thought, I'm writing a book on my telephone, and
That's
I
such a
continued to
crazy
write,
proposition.
and I'd go home and it would jump from the cloud through the cloud from my phone to the computer, and I didn't tell anybody until I had a first draft. And that is how I wrote the first draft of Clay Suzie.
That's crazy. That is great. Well, let's talk about some evolution then. So, because okay, one thing that struck me as very rhetorically brilliant, and yes, I use that phrase very purposefully, um, but it's also a little curious, is just kind of the narration style, right? So, I'm not talking about stream of consciousness. I'm not talking about anything like that. What I came to realize is that this book is narrated by Philbit as an adult, but yet it often feels like he's experiencing of how do I phrase this? We are in the memory. No, we are in the moment, not in the memory, if that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like an adult is using adult words to talk to an adult audience, but make it feel as though the adult audience is listening to a child.
Oh, I'm so glad you
If
said that. That's what I
if
was
that makes
trying to do.
sense.
Yeah, yeah. It
Oh,
is.
wow. Okay. Uh,
Yeah. I never,
um,
I never wrote, you know, so many years ago, blah blah blah. It's immediately just jumps back. It jumps back in, to when Philbert was experiencing this in real time. I wanted it to feel as though you were in Philbert's body, in his head, in his heart, and so I'm glad that that came through.
how how did you maintain this kind of balance between there's an adult perspective from time to time, but there's still a lot of childlike immediacy? Like, did that evolve over time, or did that just come out of you?
Well, it did go through an editing process, but it was intentional. I mean, I wanted to. I mean, I have so many. I draw inspiration from so many writers, many of them Southern writers, and I wanted to write a book in the Southern tradition, which is like being on a back porch listening to somebody tell a story. And if you really listen, it sounds as though those people are in the moment, not thinking back, so and so 50 years ago. If they really feel the story, they tell it as though they're in the moment of 50 years ago. It's like you're
Hmm.
watching that person go back in time. And so I wanted to write a book that was focused in the very first half. I tried, I wanted to structure it this way. I wanted the book to feel as though you were in the world as it was being built. So the first half is like sitting on the back porch. It's slow, and not slow in a sort of boring way, but it takes its time. It's languid, it's purposeful. And I wanted to structure it in the way that a life plays out, at least the way the child might think a life plays out. Because when you're young, you don't know that life has an end. You got all the time in the world. A summer lasts for 5 years. Uh, uh, a trip to the ice cream store seems like an all-day event because it's so special. It can if you let it. And that's why I wanted the first half of the book to be world building and to take its time because there is no end to time. But then a halfway point when Knox shows up, I wanted it to be like a slingshot to the end, the way at some point in our lives we realize half my life is gone. or more. And so that's why it's structured to be such a sort of a slow build into the halfway point where it just ricochets like a slingshot to the end. And I think that the voice came from that intentional um, structure that I built the book around.
Well, if I may, I am from Ohio, clearly. Um, but my family hails from very rural, poor, middle of nowhere West Virginia. And that was where most of my summers were spent. And I was very drawn to the lack of difference between rural Georgia and rural West Virginia in terms of sitting on the back porch in those rockers, hiding under stairs, um, running through the woods. The woods you describe are very different than the woods in the hills of West Virginia, but like the feeling, the summer days that never end. Um, I actually really enjoyed the fact that Philbit seems to be 4, maybe 5 years old forever, and that really comes across. And then boom, he's in the 5th grade. Um, that really, really worked. Um, but it did. I was curious because I think this is an interesting writing craft concept. Is you have a main character who's narrating the world, and then you have the world and the people, right? So when you're writing this, were you more in focused on Philbit or the world around Philbit? Maybe another way to phrase that is, were you more interested in telling the story of the environment that Philbit grew up in, or were you more focused on conveying Philbit's experience and the world around him is just context for it?
I was interested in telling the experience of my life in a way that wouldn't hurt anybody in my life. I didn't write a memoir. It was intentional that I didn't write a memoir. I wanted to fictionalize it so that I could tell my truth. I mean, I think that, one of the reasons people write memoirs, I think, is because they want to tell their truth. They want to share their story. And I wanted to do that too. But I tried to live by what I thought of as the fictionalized memoir's Hippocratic oath, which is to do no harm. Because when one tells your own story, you tell the stories of people around you. And I needed to do that, but I didn't want to hurt anybody. And even the people in the book who are not presented in the most favorable way, I tried to create them with warmth and a humanity. There's a reason that they were the way they were, and it's understandable. They weren't just evil villains; they were real people. And so, by fictionalizing it, I was able to take the essence of them and create them in Philbit's eyes. But I was really more interested in telling my story. That was the thrust of it. And I sort of imagined myself looking out of the eyes of that character. And so the world that you see created is the way that, and the way I remember it, the way a child saw a world that was not kind to him. Now and I'm not playing the victim. Philbit is not a victim. I don't see Philbit as a victim.
No,
Uh, and
no.
and he's even joyous. I mean, he's got a lot of problems, and he navigates the world around him in a way that isn't always the smartest way, isn't always the most effective way to get through it. But he is a survivor. He's a fighter. I think he's really funny. I think his mother is really funny. I think there's a lot of humor in the book. But that's what I tried to do. I tried to show this as the world seen by this child. Seen but through another character, it might look a completely different way.
Understood, understood. And actually, speaking of the characters that you created, um, off the cuff kind of question, but it dawns on me that, for example, if I was writing a fantasy book, I'm going to be creating characters from nothing. Maybe they're amalgamations of my lived experience, but they're legit, you know, from scratch characters, but you base them on real people. So do you think do you think that one is more difficult than the other? Is it harder to fictionalize a real person, or do you think it's more difficult to create something from nothing? Is there any sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
thing there?
I think that writing a book is a difficult thing to do, no matter what it is, no matter the genre. And
Yes.
you have to have a passion burning inside of you. If you don't, there's no reason to get into it because it's a tough business, for one. But if you have a story to tell, you should never try to like suppress that urge to write your truth, your story. So, this is the thing, this is the kind of stuff that I want to write. I don't know if I could write a fantasy novel. I don't know if I could. So I would say that it would be probably more difficult for me to write a fantasy book than literary fiction or a coming of age fiction, southern fiction, whatever you want to categorize it as. But I mean, it just is the most healing and for me, it's the most healing and cathartic and um, positive way to say things about the world that I really wanted to say. And I think that that's probably true of any author. That's why you want to write. So, um, if I write a fantasy book, maybe I can answer that question better. But for now, I think that I'd have to say that, just writing anything is difficult.
Were were there any moments while you were crafting this where you felt that maybe you were worried about being too honest or maybe not honest enough? That's gotta be a really hard middle ground to find.
Well, when I was writing it, most of it, I didn't realize I was writing a book. When I first started, decades ago, I didn't. I was journaling. I was writing and the what surprised me is when I look back at those journals, it looked like a novel. I was sort of taking my problems and putting on to a character that wasn't me, as though I was like lifting them off of me, scraping them off of me, and throwing them over there, so I didn't have to deal with them anymore. Um, and so that's what and so I wrote with abandon. I didn't write thinking, what will people think about this? I never thought anybody would read it because I read it for myself. About, when I described how I wrote it in the timeline. About halfway through the first draft, under 10 years ago, I was writing it for myself. I was finishing the story for myself, but I decided that that it wasn't for me anymore. I'm okay. I'll be okay. I'm good now. I was writing it for young people who are struggling as I did back then when I was, a late teen in my 20s, because I really struggled. And part of the proceeds of the sale of the book of Ray Clay Suzie go to the Trevor Project and the Born This Way Foundation. And the reason I did that is because I realized halfway through writing it, like, I'm not writing it for myself anymore. I'm writing it for young people who are having a rough time of it. There's a statistic. The Trevor Project has a 24-hour suicide hotline for LGBTQ youth. And one of the other things that they do is they conduct a survey every year of that population. And I learned a statistic from visiting their website a while ago, and it's different every year, but the numbers are not that different. But that year, the statistic was that 42% of LGBTQ youth aged from like 13 to 23 seriously considered ending their lives. And about 12% of them actually attempted it.
Yeah.
And that was just, um, it, uh, I could not believe it. It knocked the breath out of me. Like, that's horrible that so many young people are struggling, that so many young people think that there's not a place in the world for them. And I thought, I didn't have a book like this when I was younger. At least they weren't on the shelves of the bookmobile that pulled up in the the parking lot of the gas station that sat across from our house. And I thought if I can write a story that helps people who struggle now as I did back then that's what I want to do. So that's the reason I wrote it. And that's why I thought that I can't worry about what anybody's going to think about it. I was careful not to hurt anybody in my own life, but that didn't stop me from the themes that I wanted to highlight. You know, the larger world view that I've come to have because I'm a grown up now, and the things I wanted to say about how we treat each other. So I didn't want to hurt anybody, but I thought I can't be shy about having an opinion about this.
I think that's a really strong reason to be completely honest. And I, the Born This Way Foundation of the Trevor Project, I know you mentioned the hotline, um, but would you mind saving some folks the time of Googling? And is there anything else you'd like to talk about with the two nonprofits?
Well, there are 2 resources. There are so many resources out there. In fact, the Born This Way Foundation has a list on their site of other resources, including the Trevor Project. I my inclination, my natural go-to was to hide myself away, and when I was younger, and it almost did me in. It was not the right choice. There are options that were not available then that are now. I encourage anybody who is struggling to reach out and have no fear about what people will think of you. There are people who care about you, who are like you, who not are just not only like you, but like you, and are there to help you
Hmm.
get through this really difficult time because so many people don't make it. It's it's just heartbreaking. And I, every now and again, I just, like brushing my teeth or something, I look in the mirror and I just am, I'm so grateful I'm still here because I have been low and I'm not alone in that. A lot of people have been through that. I'm grateful that I made it. I'm so grateful that I made it. So I'm glad that those resources are there because they can do, like, I can't do that. I can't be a resource for the masses, but I can support a cause that can do that. And these organizations are dedicated, committed to helping these kids survive and not just survive, but thrive. And,
Thrive and flourish.
the
Yeah.
suicide hotline there all the time. But, the Born This Way Foundation and other organizations, they create programming that empowers young people and helps them sort of chart the course of their lives and just gives them opportunities that they that is the community is the key. People who are part of the community are more likely to navigate the difficult times that we all face. People who are alone don't, not as well anyway.
I am very grateful that you decided to share this story with the world. And like, if I'm being completely honest, I did not pick up your book thinking that it was going to speak to me so deeply. Um, but on some level, I think that actually goes to the heart of what Red Clay Susie is about. Uh, we aren't as different as we purport ourselves to be, despite all the othering that we inflict upon ourselves throughout the world. Um, and I think the book can be viewed in kind of two main ways. I think it can be looked at as a story about enduring or perhaps overcoming negativity of different kinds, but it could also be a story about love and just the many different forms that love takes. Um, but maybe I think perhaps both things are true. And um, it struck me that if you go into your book and you remove the drastic lack of technology and the many historical references that Philbick makes, like segregation and politics in Vietnam, it really feels as though this story could easily take place in almost any American era since the 1960s, including today, in some way, shape, or form. So I'm curious, do you feel that we as a society, as a nation, uh, as a world, have we actually made meaningful progress since Philbit's story, or is progress more fragile than we want to believe? Like, what has your experience been?
Well, one note on, it sort of Ray Clay Susie being universal in a way, because I think that the more specific a story, the more universal it can be. Because we see ourselves in other people, maybe not their specific situation, but we see the way that we react, we see the way that we see the way that we feel in others, and so that has been a something that I'm glad has happened. People of all walks of life, people who have never set foot in the South, have read it and reached out to me and said how much that they identify with Philbit and that world, even though they've never lived in it. But I do agree. I think it's Maya Angelou. There's actually they've used her in a commercial. I can't remember what the commercial is now, but she repeats. She's actually at a conference. I mean, she's been asked to give some wise words or something, and she kind of laughs about it. And she says 3 times, "We are more alike than we are different. We are more alike than we are different." And not those words exactly. She's much more um, eloquent and poetic about it. But she's right. We are so similar. And I think that, the world back then was easier to navigate in so many ways and more difficult. We didn't have examples of perfection around us. You can go online now and and you see these perfectly curated existences on social media. And to compare ourselves with that is not healthy. But we also have the opportunity to connect with other people who are like us. So a child in rural Georgia in the 1970s, I know that it happens now too. People feel alone now as well. But it was so I have a dear friend, another author, Robert Gwaltney, who grew up in another small town in Georgia around the same time I did. And we didn't know each other then, of course. We were across the state. But we talk about having just almost identical experiences, feeling as though we were the only ones in the world who were like this. Although a child in the same setting now with access to technology, I hope can find at least maybe difficult to navigate, but at least they can know that they're not alone, that there are other people out there. It's it's the communications explosion of our generation, I mean, look back just a few decades and we were using rotary telephones. That was the only way, hooked to the wall with a cord. That was really the only
Yeah.
connection we had.
Uh-huh.
Now people have their pocket computers and they can text their friends. Back then, you had to like broker time on the family telephone. You got 3 channels if you were lucky on the television, but now they're streaming. So it's this communications age that we live in. There's so much coming at us. It's almost as though it overwhelms us. I think it's difficult
Yes.
to sort all through that and find the real stuff. It's also easy it's also difficult to have your message put out there for anybody to hear it. There's so much noise, there's so much competition to have, your particular story out. So that's a something that wasn't as difficult years ago because there were fewer communications channels, fewer people who were producing ideas and thoughts. So there's a blessing there too. There's so much out there you can find yourself in the other stuff presented, but it's difficult to sort through it all. It's also difficult to be heard. I just, that's like a word salad, probably. I'm muddled, but um, I don't think that I think it depends on your situation, whether it's easier or, more difficult. Or more difficult. Yeah. I think the thing I would say about that is that
Yes.
life is difficult in isolation. And and
Mm.
it's possible to be isolated even today with all the technology and people around us. But if you can break away from that, my inclination was to hide myself away. And the in the book I write, um, in Red Clay Suzie, I write some form of it's gosh, I have to sort of remind myself of how it went. There, if you can fight the inclination to hide yourself away, that's the key to it all. If I could, sneak back in time to my 12-year-old self and whisper into my ear, what would I say? And I would say that, fight that urge to hide yourself away from the world, connect with others. You're not so different from them. And that, your body, eh, with all of its differences, with all of its imperfections, real or perceived imperfections, is precious. And to treat it with as much kindness and care and love as you can, so that it will take you as far and as long as it can. And that, you know, love, real love, is never wrong, and to bravely bestow it on whomever's worthy of it. Those are the things that I wish I had known when I was younger, but I didn't know those things. And it was because of my isolation and my inclination to sort of pull into myself and not connect with others.
The not hiding away reminds me of some lyrics that Dave Matthews wrote once upon a time, where he says, "Don't hide away like an ocean that you can't see, but you can still smell and hear the sound of waves
Mm,
crashing down." Um,
God,
so it's
that's
almost
poetry.
like we can't actually always completely hide away. We're still there. So don't hide. Let it out. And I think that's a
Yeah,
very beautiful sentiment.
yeah, because the more you the more you try to hide yourself, the more successful you are at it. And then there comes a time in life when you may not want to, but it's sort of built into your life. You've structured your life to push everything away, and that's dangerous. That's
Mhm.
It's destructive, and people sense that you want to be left alone. I believe that. I believe that you can send a signal to others that you're not to be approached. It's a protective thing. I protected myself. I can sense and see other people doing it, and it's it really is the 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 wrong inclination, the wrong in it's the wrong reaction to a world that is sometimes not friendly to you.
Yes. Um, something it's very interesting. I'm an 80s baby, and what's interesting is that the childhood that I remember is not appreciably different from the one depicted in Red Clay Susie, oddly enough. Um, but then I think about like people my age with their kids, and their parenting styles are drastically different. And that's probably a reaction to, I guess, what we could term childhood trauma. And I don't necessarily mean like direct abuse or anything like that, but some of the things that Philbit undergoes with watching mama have mini strokes, or just having an unhappy and dysfunctional household. The bullying and the othering and blah blah blah. But then years later in the book, Philbit mentions that he doesn't hold anything against his family and just thinks that they weren't equipped to deal with life
Yeah,
at the time. So
yeah,
that makes me curious. Now that you've written, you've felt, you've reflected and learned, where do you think the line between childhood hardship and childhood trauma is? And maybe how do people try to start making sense of that as adults?
Childhood hardship and childhood trauma. Wow. Well, just to speak specifically about like Philbert, my family was not equipped to deal with me. Um, it wasn't, um, it wasn't willful neglect, but it was parenting through what I think of as sort of equal parts love and um, it was equal parts love and fear of the world themselves. Ill-equipped to deal with anything outside the norm. And what were they to do with an effeminate, um, you know, a child with a physical difference who didn't fit the mold of the typical boy, which is the only mold that they knew. And so, I've come to at this stage of my life, I've long ago. I mean, I've come to accept that those are the things that made me who I am, the man I am, the person I am. My life would be very different if it hadn't been that way, and uh, I want the life that I have. So that is about hardship, I think. Trauma is quite a different thing, and the difficult the different the difficult part about dealing with trauma is that oftentimes this is the way I think of it anyway. If you were traumatized, those forces are probably inflicting their trauma on somebody else. Like, what responsibility do I have? Does that person who's experienced it earlier have to do something about that to stop the trauma for others? Sometimes you can do something. You can speak up when you're able to do it, when you can safely do it. Other times, it's too late. The forces that cause the trauma are gone. A person passes away or things change. I think that the way to deal with it for me is to do something positive in the world that can have an impact, an opposite force to have a different impact. For me, it was writing this book to say it can be really bad. You might think you're the only person in the world who is like you, but there's power in all of us. And if you can hold on, find those, and I hope and I believe this, and I don't want anybody to prove me wrong, but I believe that there, in those concentric circles of humanity, there's someone who will look after you, pull you through, lift you up until you can do it yourself, until you can then do it for other people. So that's the way I try to deal with trauma, have tried to deal with trauma, and hope that others can see the example, from my book, from organizations like the Born This Way Foundation, Trevor Project, and others. There are even local organizations, not national, but local organizations. How to spot those people who are safe, who care about you, even though they don't even know you. That's the best way, I think, to work through your own trauma and to help other people do the same thing and maybe even avoid it. I mean, life is hard. Let's face it. Life can be joyous, and it is, but there are difficult
Hmm.
times. There are difficult forces out there. There are
Yes.
challenging, dangerous forces out there. And I don't think the answer is the same for everybody as to how you deal with it or how you make a mark, be a force in the world to counteract it. But there were examples out there that you can maybe emulate. That's what I want to be. That's what I hope people take from the book, as well as being entertained. Because, I mean, the funniest thing I don't want to give away too much, but the funniest line in the book is when Mama, Philbert's mother, describes how the grandmother makes iced tea. I think that is the funniest thing in the world. And it's two lines, but there are things like that popped all through the book that I hope make it realistic because even when times are bad, let's try to find something, you know, light in it, something funny in it. I think because I think it actually makes a story that is, has that is dark, more believable, makes it more real because life is like that. That's
Mhm.
why I try to look for those concentric circles of humanity, floating around, swirling around. They're there even in the darkest times, I hope.
A moment in the book that I found to be very it spoke to me, and I just felt it could speak to a lot of people is the moment when Philbit compares homophobia with racism when he's talking to James. Philbit maintains for people that don't know, Philbit maintains that they're the same because they're both a form of discrimination or a form of othering and right or but then James maintains that they are fundamentally different, could not be the same thing at all. And both like I see both sides, right? Having like I was othered for a very good chunk of my life, right? Growing up, I was called Nancy a lot, which is like the 90s version of Susie. And that allows me to empathize. But then growing up with like a lazy, nearly blind eye really only provides me a form of relatability or cognitive sympathy to Philbit's pectoral deformity. But we were both othered, and I can read and feel and understand, right? So, what's your take? Are you team Philbit or are you team James? Do you believe that these different forms of othering are all sort of the same, or are they exclusively different?
Well, James is I think, my favorite character in the book. James is Philbit's best friend from first grade all the way through high school, and James is he's black, and he lives in a world where racism um, is just a way of life, and
Yes.
he sees the world in a fundamentally different way than Philbit. And because he sees the world for what it is. He's much more savvy. He's more worldly than Philbit, but he's still a kind, gentle, and really funny person. And he
Yes.
helps Philbit in a pivotal scene. We won't give away too much. He helps Philbit see the world in the way that it really is. He helps Philbit get closer to seeing the world in the way that it really is, because Philbit is very sheltered. But he has these moments of discovery, and he's more aware, and he's like, okay, that's another part of the world I kind of get now, but wow, I didn't get it before. So I wanted to create this these two points of view, both valid, um, that I experienced when I was growing up. Having one particular point of view, but discovering that, like, not everybody believes that's the case. But yeah, I think there's power in others banding together and realizing that whatever the differences are, there are people, forces that don't want us to exist, to have as many rights, to be considered as fully human as the others are, as we are, the people who are doing the othering. But I also think that all of us, in some way, all of us have been outsiders to some degree, for some reason or another. And so I don't think you have to take a side. What I think the important part of it is that we recognize that we feel the same way. I think that's the valid part of it.
I love that answer. I love that.
Oh, good.
Um, and I guess speaking of love, let's say that some of the emotionally heavy lifting is done for a moment, and we can switch gears and we'll just talk about love before we all need to sit down with a strong cup of tea. Yeah. um, let's start here. When you are madly in love with someone and they love you back, that's the sticking point, right? Acts of affection are like they're heartwarming. Sending notes, staring at them because they're beautiful or you get lost in their eyes, finding comfort in listening to them sleep. These kinds of things. It's great. It's heartwarming. But when the love is unrequited, right? Those kinds of things are suddenly kind of intrusive and a little bit creepy, um, or at least can be perceived as such, right? Philbit, as sort of a naive type of youth, kind of plays jump rope with this a little bit in the book from time to
Mm,
time as he's growing and learning.
mhm.
And it makes me wonder, um, do you think maybe that love is defined more by what we give, or is love defined more by what we receive? And like, how does that translate into Philbit's experiences, or maybe even your own?
You kind of broke up at the end, but I think I got the gist of the question. I believe that love is real love, mature love, not mature love, true love. True love is what you give. And Philbert is very young
Hmm.
and doesn't really know what love is. And his point of view really is like what he wants from somebody else, what he the the physical sensation that he gets from um, what might happen if he gets what he wants. But he's not really, I think, aware of the nuances of love. He gives. I mean, he gives in the way he reacts to his mother and his grandfather, but he's not looking at it as the same kind of love. I don't think, even recognizes it as love. He has the capacity to understand love in its fullness, I believe. But in this particular relationship, it's all about what he wants, what he feels, what he wants to experience. It's a very immature love, but it's palpable. I mean, this kid
Hmm.
just you can you can hear it off of him, you can smell it off of him. He wants what he wants. Maybe one day he'll get to the place where he can recognize what true love is and give as much as he takes, but that's not what this is about. And I recognize the how it could be creepy, the things he does. I mean, he watches Knox from the back seat of a wrecked out 98 Regency Oldsmobile, sitting in the back seat, peeking past the headrest so that he can't be spotted. And he's stalking this guy,
Yep.
but he does it in the sweetest, most innocent way.
Hmm.
And at one point, he takes a personal item of Knox's for himself, and he feels guilty about it, but he still does it. Uh, so, but I believe it's not creepy,
No.
but it's not creepy because of the way he does it as an intention and the way that he describes it. But yeah, I think love is more about what you give, and Philbert will get there.
Philbit will get there for sure. For sure, we all get there. Red Clay Susie is more than just love, about love between two people, right? I think it dives really deeply into the idea of self love. Um, and I really appreciated um, the work that the inclusion of cars did in
Mm,
this story, right? Um, it is, Philbit is a little bit neurodivergent, and I think his, we can call it like childhood obsession with cars, is a little bit of a way to show that, to illustrate it.
mm,
But it's also kind of a comfort. It's like a worry stone or a comfort blanket to him that he holds on to his
mm,
cars well into when his dad said he should grow up, kind of a thing. But more so, I think cars illustrate his entire journey of learning and self-love of about himself throughout the entire book. And for example, right, cars are beautiful. They've got great paint jobs. You can make the inside beautiful and reupholster like you're getting yourself a new suit. Um, but then that can be dented or scratched or ripped. But guess what? We can fix those things. But then ultimately, it's what matters under the hood of the car, because if that's all busted up, the car's not going anywhere and it won't work. So I'm fascinated. It's done so deeply into your book. It is ingrained from like page one. All of this cars. What went into crafting such a poignant worldly metaphor, um, that is also just all about characterization and worldview? Like it's so pervasive. Was that How much thought did that take, or was that just organic? Are you just an organic person?
Well, I had an obsession when I was a child of cars. And this is my 1968 Mercury Cougar Matchbox
What's the green? All
from
right.
childhood, which is a character in the book. And
Yes.
this little car has doors that open. And I imagined that these doors were wings when I was a child. And it flew me to places that only existed in my desperately lonely little heart. And Philbert sees this car as his best friend when he's really young. Goes everywhere with him. It is as you said, it's that stone that it's his touchstone. He rolls it on his knee when he has to sit still at the hospital, back and forth. I think I even write in the book that the car travels like 1,000 miles back and forth on his knee because he can't go anywhere else. And I translated that into real cars because he sees people who choose cars that he likes as being similar to him in some way. It's a way for him to connect or feel an affinity with another person. If that person chose that car, which is a car I would choose if I could have a car, then there's something about us that's similar. And I wanted to show, I wanted to, I wanted to personify them, as beautiful beings with these beautiful lines and that have to sit out in the heat. And his cool little hand touching them along the edge gives them a bit of comfort in that hot day. That's the gentle part of him, a way to express that gentle, kind part of him. And it was intentional. It wasn't a, um, I didn't find it that difficult because I've always had I've always been drawn to cars on my own because they represent, I mean, if you think of it sort of on the most simple level, they represent escape, a way for him to get in a car and travel out of town. But it's so much more complex than that. These cars really are his only friends for a while. He can climb inside of them, be embraced by them. The seats, they're shelter for him. They allow one of them, which will never roll again because it's wrecked and in a junkyard. He can sit inside and watch his heart's desire, 2 car lengths ahead, going about his day. These cars enable him to exist in the world in a safe way. And to describe them as lovingly as I tried to, I hope showed that he wasn't alone all the time. And life was difficult. He had a lot of challenges, but they are part of those concentric, those safe places and those concentric circles of humanity.
Yep.
These cars were. That's what I wanted to show. And then, of course, there's the GTO that Knox drives, and this just sets Knox's heart on fire. He's as in love. His blood is boiling for that car as much as it is for Knox. And the combination of the two of them is more than a teenage boy should have to endure. It's his dream.
I'll tell you what, those GTOs back in the day were super cool. Those were awesome.
Yeah. If I could have a car, of any car in the world, I think that would probably be the one. Yeah. There's a
Um,
company that takes old like classic cars and engineers them and makes them into modern day cars. Like infrastructure, the understructure is made to make the car safe if there's a collision. There's a modern motor, and if I had a bunch of money, that's what I'd do. I'd go and get one of those GTO, have it remade into a modern day car.
well, fingers crossed one day.
One day.
Um, I think on top of the car, which by the way, I'm so glad you pulled out that matchbox. That warms my heart so much. I loved that thing. I'm so glad that Philbit climbed the fence and went and got it. That was such a great moment. But then there you have a bunch of other allusions to the idea that broken things or weird things, they're not
Hmm.
worthless, right? It's that our
Hmm.
idiosyncrasies are the things that are most important because if everybody was the same, then nobody would be anybody. That kind of a sentiment.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that makes this book have a very wonderful intersection of like
Mm.
acceptance from others with the acceptance of self. But I think that's also tricky, and it's something that Philbit struggles with because after all, right, why would I accept myself if nobody else accepts me? But why would anybody
Yeah.
else accept me if I can't accept myself? Right? It's kind of like a chicken and an egg situation. Um,
Yeah.
so how how does someone begin to, that process of acceptance from others versus acceptance of self when they've spent years feeling rejected? How do would you have any advice, or would Philbit have any advice on how to get over that?
Well, Philbert doesn't figure it out for a long time. He does struggle with it. He never says it quite in those words. He's not that articulate. He's not that aware, I don't think. But he talks about at some point, I mean, he talks about potatoes, misshapen potatoes. And a lesson, it's his very first lesson that he remembers from his grandfather about how to navigate, how to be in the world. And I don't want to give too much away. It's really early in the book, but it's 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 an example of seeing something that is broken or not ideal, not perfect, but having value. And he does. He sees it.
Mhm.
He sees it immediately when it's pointed out to him. He sees the value, and he, sees the same thing in wrecked cars in this junkyard that he hangs out in. He imagines them. He wants to help them. He wants to fix them. He wants to, take off the parts of them that are crashed and fix them so they can enjoy time on the road again. Um, but I think that the best way to and then later on he recognizes, like, I thought that this person didn't like me, but the truth is I don't like myself. He says that to himself. Phil Philbert does. The best way to get through that, in my view, is to think this. And a friend told me this years ago, and then another friend, actually, two friends who don't know each other. Another friend in recent years said the same thing. Talk about yourself in the way that your closest friend would talk about you, which is to be kind. Like you say, if there's this running monologue in someone's head about I'm worthless, I'm stupid, I can't get anything right. Now, why am I like this? Would you say that to your best friend? Would you say that about your best friend? Probably not. So why would you say it about yourself? That one small change in the way that we have conversations with ourselves, monologues in our heads, it's a kindness to stop that, and it can have a huge impact if you really try to not talk to yourself as though you're worthless. It also helps if there are people around you who think that you're not worthless and remind you That's why these organizations are so important, because to see other people who are imperfect, because we're all imperfect,
Yes.
allows us to be more forgiving of ourselves. And that's really difficult to do, especially when you're young. And all these images, messages about perfection and this curated life continually bombard our television screens and our iPhone screens. Or even the people we go to, people in school with us or people in our neighborhoods wanting more. I don't want to get religious about it, but there are, there are commandments kind of about this kind of stuff. Like, don't covet other people's things.
Yes.
Value what you have, value who you are. And it's not that easy. It's not easy to do. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but just changing that dialogue in your head can be a really important step in recognizing you are valuable and not having to have other people say it. If you have to depend on other people, hopefully they're there, but they might not be there always. You need to be able to do it for yourself. It's I'm oversimplifying it, I think, but that's, I think, an important first step. It's just to be
I think
kind
it's
to yourself.
I think it's impossible to not oversimplify it. But I also think that simple things are what oftentimes we need to hear. Yeah. Um, if I might touch one more point on love, I was a really big fan of how you wrote the three men who I feel represent love in Philbit's life, who are not his family, right? Um, you have Wright, who is just wrong and represents like misguided love, right? You have Bo, who is just beautiful and represents unconditional, understanding love. And then you have Knox, who is the night, when things are darkest just before the dawn, and he represents transformative love. Or at least this is how I read it. And I really appreciate your naming of those three men. Whether I made that up in my head or not, I don't know. But um, at one point or another, they all help Philbit realize the struggles we go through. Or he realizes that the struggles we go through are what ultimately lead us to love. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, looking back, which kind of love do you think ultimately changed Philbit the most or impacted him the most?
I think it's the way he loves himself or doesn't at any point.
Okay.
Those experiences help. They offer those moments of Philbit growing, becoming more aware, realizing. So I thought of Philbit as walking through this world over these years and just not able to see everything. He see that, which because he sees so much. He sees the world in such a sort of a technicolor way, and describes it so delicately but intricately. I mean, the way he sees the world is just. I think it's almost. I tried to write it as poetry, but he doesn't see what's really important. And through these interactions with these different people, these three men in particular, he sort of scoops off part of the world around him and sees behind it. It's as though there's a a diorama and he's caught in it. And these pieces of information or awareness that he gets from these other people are are like he's growing claws and can sort of scrape away part of that thing that's in front of him blocking his path. And he sees past it and through it. And he understands the world a little bit better. And every time he does it, he understands himself a little better too. And ultimately, by the time you get to the end of the book, he's not all the way there. Because this is not the end of Philbit and Knox's story. But I think by the end, he has that ultimate realization like, oh my gosh, it's been me the entire time. I'm the problem. So that's what I tried to do.
I like that. It's a very Taylor Swift kind of moment. It's, "Hi, I'm the problem, it's me,"
I'm sorry,
right?
it's me,
Yeah. Well,
though she's not the problem.
no, no, she's not. Well, let me ask you this: if Knox and Philbit's story is not over, inquiring minds want to know: do you have anything planned that we should be on the lookout for?
I do. I'm actually almost to the end of a first draft of a different story, a different novel.
Okay.
Uh, I'll come back to Philbit later on, but I've had this other idea in mind that I've been working on for a while, and it's with actually with a development editor now to give me some ideas, some feedback, um, and I hope to get that soon. I'm excited about that. But yeah, there's more to Philbit and Knox's story. I don't want to sort of give too much of that away, but it's going to pick up right at the end of Red Clay Susie. It's that night. It picks up at that night, in that moment.
Does does Philbit does he continue to go to college like he tells Knox? Can we
Maybe,
at least know that?
maybe.
Maybe. Maybe. Okay.
I think if
Well,
Philbit didn't go to college, if he didn't go to college, it would be a step backwards for him.
I would agree, but like love is love, and if you're gonna fictionalize love, I get it.
Got to have conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Although going to college is the conflict because now there is distance and right. So, but sounds good. Sounds interesting. Would you like to tell listeners and readers where they can get in touch with you or to follow your
Sure,
journey and be on the lookout?
absolutely. So my author site is jeffreydlofton.com. And I'm on, the social media channels, mostly Instagram and Facebook, Jeffrey D. Lofton, at Jeffrey D. Lofton. That's my handle. And I just love to connect with readers and writers. So I'd love to hear from anybody. In fact, I got a note from someone who read my book recently, and I got a card. I got someone sent me another uh, Mercury Cougar. I have quite a few of these. People bring them to me at book events. I've got, you can't see them, but I've got a whole line of them on my shelf above, and I just love them. They're all special, and I mark where I got them and who gave them to me, so I'll never forget. Um, so they're little reminders that the story has resonated with folks and meant something. Feel it means something to them, and I just love that. So, so I love talking to folks, and in fact, if people want to have a book club, they want me to come to the book club. I love doing that. There's a book club kit on the website, on my author site, with like recipes and a history of Matchbox cars and a description of where, Warm Springs, where it's set, just all kinds of information, questions to ask each other. So
Fantastic, fantastic. I do want to be cognizant of your time, and I thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to speak with me. Um, if you're game for it, I have one more kind of philosophical note to end on.
I'm yours. I have nothing to do except
All right.
this.
I would like to read your book to you for a second.
Okay.
Um, on page 256, Philbit narrates something I found to be a very profound puzzle, right? He says that some can only see the past, what has been. Some can only see the present and what is or is not. No one can see the future, but some sense it and know that the future will be different, better even. James was like that. After everything that you've reflected on through this book, what kind of person do you feel like you are today? Someone living in the past, experiencing the present, or maybe sensing the future? And maybe did the act of writing this novel change that at all?
Mm. Writing this book really did change me. It in ways that I'd never imagined, couldn't have anticipated. I've always hid myself, even as recently as a few years ago. I've always hidden who I am, thinking that who I am is not good enough. And all that went right out the window because I admitted that the book was about me. It's fictionalized, but the heart of Philbert is my heart. His world is my world. His struggle has been my struggle. And so I am a person who acknowledges the past, but is more focused on the future. And that's the change because I've always, always, always lived in the past. So telling one's story, telling one's truth is one of the most powerful things you can do.
Amazing, amazing. One more time for everybody listening. The novel is Red Clay Susie by my amazing guest, the extremely talented writer Jeffrey Dale Lofton. And on that note, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. And we'll see you all. You should all go to Crozet, Virginia, to the Crozet Book Fest and visit the Bluebird Bookstore.
Yes,
Flan Cannon and and her colleagues there, Chelsea, the whole team, they're amazing. It's a family as much as it is a community. And independent bookstores in general are the same way. But I'm mentioning them because that's where we met, and they're just special
yes.
fun.
They are very special folks. Um, everybody should, if you can't get there physically, hit up their website. It is
Yeah.
also a joy.
And
So
follow them on Instagram because they are funny. They do all these videos.
they're
They sell
hilarious.
more than books. It's more than books. They have clothes, and they're just hilarious.
Um, I love the fact. I yes, I love they're great. Anyways, if you'd like to keep in touch, please leave a comment or send us an email. Both my own and Jeffrey's contact information will be found in the description down below. And if you are looking for a mostly spoiler-free review of Red Clay Susie, please check out my page. If you're listening to this, that is already going to be up. So thank you so much for listening. And until next time, cheers.